Viv Albertine. Who is celebrating the Spanish release of her best-selling smash hit book, her revisionist history book, Close, 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 Music, 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 Boys, Boys, Boys. Let's have a round of applause for Viv Albertine. So, Viv doesn't only want to talk about punk rock. She wants you to get over it. Get over it. It happened a long time ago. Let's move on into the modern age, right? Things that are happening now. But the book, which I love, do you have a copy of the book with you?
No.
Well, I have a copy, but it's in the other room. It's a fantastic book. I really love it. I told you this already. Oh yeah. This is the Spanish edition of this fantastic book. We don't know what it says because it's in Spanish and we're English speakers, so it could really say anything. In fact, I talked to the publisher and she said because Spain is a Catholic country that they took out all the references to premarital sex. And that's why it's much thinner. It's a much smaller volume. No, seriously, it's an incredible book, and it's obviously, it charts your whole history as a person. And the Slits, who are arguably one of the most influential rock and roll groups ever, figures prominently, but it's a whole journey. And why did you choose to go beyond the thing, the punk era, and talk about your whole life?
Well, after the Slits, I sort of couldn't bear to listen to music anymore, and I went into a bit of a slump for about 20 years. And my friends were saying to me, you could write a book about those times, but, Britain being such a small country, once something's happened there, within 2 weeks it's history, so it wasn't cool to have been in the Slits, and I didn't think it was a cool thing to write about. And so I wasn't very interested in just writing about being in a band, especially as so many other things had happened to me since then, in the past, the 20 years afterwards. Not great things, but things that were very important and seemed to sort of diminish having just been in a band and played guitar. But then what with the internet, young people started to sort of rediscover the Slits, and whereas a lot of writers, a lot of people back in the day were terrified of us and we didn't get written about, we didn't get put into anthologies, punk anthologies or whatever, when young people discovered us again through the internet, they weren't scared. I don't know if they weren't scared because we were old and past, or the world had moved on and they could see sort of how important we were without being terrified of the fact that we were young women with attitude. So anyway, so people kept saying, write a book, and I thought, no, it's not interesting, until when I was about 50, I picked up a guitar again, which, again, absolutely exploded my life upside down. So it just goes to show that an electric guitar, it still has the power to sort of destroy lives or change things, because I picked up my guitar, I've been married 17 years, my husband said, if you play guitar, that's the end of our marriage. Even though he'd loved that I was in the Slits and boasted about that, it was a very different thing to have it in the family kind of thing, in the room. So it was an impossible ultimatum, because if someone says that to you, it's not that I didn't want to be part of marriage anymore, but I realised that he didn't love me. So what was the point, because no one who loves you would say that. So when I picked up the guitar again, suddenly I saw an arc, like a shape that the book could have. There was a young girl picking up a guitar in the 70s when no young girls played guitar, as far as I knew. I was working class, I was undereducated, and the guitar was a passage out of my incredibly boring and limited life. And then I picked it up again when I was 50, and again I was told, you can't do it, you're a woman, women don't do that, you should be at home. All the same sort of things. I had an incredible deja vu, and so I thought, no, there's a shape. Now the book's worth writing. what happened between that girl picking up the guitar at 19 when no one did it, and that woman picking it up again at 50, you know, when women of that age weren't doing it. So, and, you know, I lost my home. My daughter lost, you know, the safeness of a nuclear family, I suppose. It was not a small decision. I lost my Audi. I drive a Skoda now. And so that's what made me think. I thought just punk on its own, without a context, wasn't interesting, but the whole shape of a woman doing it again, all those years later, and again, the problems that brought, and how in between I'd only ever tried to express myself, and how very difficult that still is for a woman, and how lonely it is actually for a female artist in any genre. So I thought that's a book worth writing.
Wow. That's. So when you were working for the BBC, after you were in the Slits, you did work as a filmmaker for the BBC. So do you feel like that helped you as a storyteller, like understand storytelling, and you know, for writing this book? Because the book is really, it's gripping all the way through. There's not this kind of, most memoirs have this boring part in the beginning, and then, you know.
Yeah, I mean, the shape of the book was very influenced, first of all, by punk, because I thought, I still feel, I mean, most people who were involved with punk weren't involved with it because it was cool. I mean, there were hardly any music papers. There was no way we were going to get on TV. We were drawn together because we were the same type of people. And I still have those values that I had then. I realised, you know, as I came out of the marriage, I still am this person. And I still believe that things should be simple and things should be honest in your authentic voice, and they shouldn't waffle on. So I wrote like that. I wrote every chapter almost like it was a Ramones song. You know, you're straight in with what you want to say, you say it, and then you get out. No guitar solos, you know, no ooh-la-las or whatever. And that's how I wrote the chapters. I mean, occasionally there was a gentler chapter that needed length or a bit more of a poetic take, not much, maybe a few descriptions, but yeah, so very much it was like an album. I saw it, side 1 and side 2, short, sharp chapters that say what they need to say and no more. So that was a massive influence. Then rather than being at the BBC, but film school also really, really developed my visual sense. So as I wrote, I saw everything in my head. I mean, I'm that sort of person anyway. I have to see to learn. And so I saw the scenes and sort of tried to describe as if it's a movie. Without, not consciously, but this is how I think, you know, so I think visually, so I tried to just describe the pictures of the scenes. I mean, I forgot loads of interesting and important stuff. I didn't write that down. All I wrote about was things that had stuck in my mind. So it's like an emotional diary, rather than one that's got all the facts and figures. So I never kept a diary, certainly not during punk times. And so I just remembered all the terrible things that happened to me, because they're the things that last longer in your mind. People who fucked you over, when you've been humiliated, where you've been sacked, where you've been dropped from a band, where sex has gone wrong, all that kind of thing. Oh, that reminds me, I could read that.
Yeah, you could.
So I hope this is okay with the what's it called? Translation, thank you. So it's 1976, and Iggy Pop's album, The Idiot, is playing on the stereo. I'm lying on a mattress in my loft with Johnny Rotten. We've ended up in bed together a couple of times, but usually we're with loads of other people because we've all missed the last bus home, because this is about 1976. John and I have both got all our clothes on, and we lie there gossiping about a couple of people, Sid Vicious mostly. And when we run out of conversation, he asks me to go down on him, to give him a blowjob. Well, I've never given anyone a blowjob before. Really, I haven't. I suppose I should have done by now. I am 22, because I have got this theory that the Americans brought blowjobs over in the 70s. So we English didn't really do that. There's a big thing over in America. But anyway, so I was 22 and hadn't given a blowjob. I've snuffled around down there enough times, but I haven't actually tried to make a guy come by sucking him off. So I'm using very 70s language because it's written in the present tense like a diary. Anyway, I think to myself, oh, I'll give it a go. I've just got to lick it and suck it. How difficult can it be? So I slide down to Johnny's crotch, and he gets his willy out. He smells of stale piss. So do I. We all do. I like it. It's familiar. That smell is nice and cosy to me. No one I know washes before or after sex. It doesn't occur to us. We're not squeamish about bodily smells. We expect it to smell different down there, and to be all dark and hairy, and maybe even a bit crispy if you haven't been home for a few days. Anyway, I tentatively start sucking, but after a few licks I hear an imperious voice from on high. Stop it, Viv. I look up. What's he want? I'm busy down here. Stop it, Viv, he says. You're trying too hard. Anyway, I laugh, but I'm mortified. I wipe my mouth on the back of my hand. He zips up his trousers and we go downstairs. I make a quick cup of tea and then he leaves, thank God. And I cringe inside, imagining him laughing at me as he walks to the tube station. I'm still cringing now.
So, one thing I thought about when reading your book, because it's full of so much information, both from this era, because you were really at the epicenter of this thing. You're one of the inventors of this, rock and roll apocalypse. And, but I thought about, what did you leave out? What did you leave out? Is there things that, because you mentioned, you forgot to put certain things in, and after you published, or after you turned in the final manuscript, did things occur to you, I should have put this thing in?
After I turned in the final manuscript, they couldn't get it off me, I was so scared. And after I turned it in, I had a mental breakdown because I was so scared that I'd put too much in. Not about other people, but about myself, that I'd really... Because as I sit and wrote the book at the kitchen table, I thought there's no point trying to make myself sound nice, trying to make myself sound cool. That's of no use to anybody. Any young kid starting a band or has come from working class background who's worried they're not going to make anything of themselves in life. If I try and make out I came from a good background or my parents were cool or whatever, there's just no good in the book, because for me, there was no point in writing the book just as a sort of vanity project. I wanted it to have some resonance and be of some use to other people. So the only way I could do that is to write the absolute truth. And I was terrified. I was definitely sure I would never get a boyfriend again. And I haven't. Honestly, because I just feel I was so exposing about my body, how my body worked, and where I'd been disloyal and where I'd been cruel and where I'd fucked guys over and when I was lacking in confidence. So I felt I'd put too much in, not in terms of volume, but in terms of honesty. But there was no way I could do it without. I mean, that was another bit of our punk ethos, that, that you were honest about things. Otherwise, where's the world going to go if every single person is bit by bit doing their little bit of lying and faking? Things go off. If everyone sort of told the truth in their own little orbit, then we would help keep the world sane. So anyway, that's why I wrote the truth. So no, I don't feel I left anything out. I mean, I was going to write the book, anyone who wants to read this book for dates and times and makes a guitar, forget it. It wasn't like a bus timetable. Because I know a lot of guys who write books about music, it's all about the dates and the absolute getting this right and getting that right. But mine was an emotional diary. So it was about emotional events, which I thought, a lot of people are going to say, that's so girly, but they didn't, because, the way a woman, especially when I was young, listened to music, not many, no girls played rock music that I knew of, don't forget, we didn't have the internet, I didn't hear of the odd person in America or Canada or whatever. As far as I knew, there weren't any girls who played guitar till Susie Quattro. So I mean, it was, I've lost my train now.
What you left out of the book, or that you didn't?
Anyway, so I didn't leave anything out except all the boring stuff, basically.
Yeah. Well, it's, One thing you said that I read something where you said a lot of people have tried to make a movie or they want to make a movie out of this thing, but you've said no, which I really respect because or not that you shouldn't, but you know. But what else have you said no to? Like, what are the things that, because people are only known by what they say yes to.
Yeah, I agree. I said no to sex with Vincent Gallo. That was pretty cool.
That's
I've said no to sex with nearly everyone in the last 5 years. What else? I said no to all the movie offers and play at the National Theatre in London, because as I started to do the work with the people, the director or whatever, I started to think, you know, it was such an intimate thing to write on the page my thoughts, that the people I wrote about forgave me, because they were just quietly reading my thoughts and I was quietly writing them down. But to have a stage with someone acting Johnny Rotten and someone acting Vincent Gallo or whatever, acting Ari Up, it suddenly seemed exploitative.
Yeah.
Whereas it was only meant to be an intimate memoir.
Yeah.
And
a history.
And a history, and to put it on the stage and have people act my husband or act, I mean, it was just wrong, you know, because all the degrees that it would get removed from the book. The director has his or her vision, the casting director, then the actor, you know, then the camera person, the angles. Bit by bit, it would get further and further away from the intimacy of the book. And much as I would have loved the money and the kudos, I couldn't do it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, because what happens is people become caricatures, symbols, like what's love got to do with it? Ike Turner is now just... Yeah, the caricature, because people already saw people of that time as caricatures. And although I didn't set out to set the record straight with Sid Vicious or John or any of them, you know, I only wrote about what I knew about them. But people kept saying, oh, now they've seen such 3D characters. Yeah. And, you know, so, and I don't want to be a cartoon myself, so, yeah. Yeah. So I said no to that, I said no to sex, I said no to relationships, because they get in your way when you try and create. Yeah. I mean, you have to be so selfish. You have to work every day. You have to think about what you're doing. You have to be, you know, in a way, when I started writing songs again when I was 50, my husband said to me, you can't write stuff like that in your lyrics. It's too honest, you know, about our relationship or whatever. But to be any kind of artist, if I dare call myself that, you have to be that honest. Otherwise, it's just not going to resonate. Yeah. Or if, you know, I thought if I fail and I've kind of only half written the truth, I will be so angry with myself. But if I fail and I've written the absolute truth, I don't care. So I can live with that. Yeah, yeah. So, yeah, so I've said no to lots. So you're a product of this era of Britain when Britain was going through a kind of mass convulsion. And maybe, I don't know, like, I mean, I know we're not going to talk about punk much longer, but if we talk about why punk happened, was it inevitable, or was it just this kind of, like, the form that it took and your role in shaping what that thing became? I mean, it's quite fascinating, you know, because, you know, Roxy music, you know, like, obviously everybody's waiting for this thing to happen. People were waiting for a new spark in rock and roll because rock and roll was so important to people. But yeah, I don't know. Discuss the context when you were young of England and what it was like, because it must be like talking to your daughter and trying to explain what the world was like must be strange.
It was very bleak. I mean, Britain was very inward-looking country. You know, in fact, since joining the EU, Britain has been such a better country. So, you know, and a lot of people in our country don't remember what it was like before, but I do. The food was terrible, art wasn't appreciated, we didn't have all, you know, interesting mixture of cooks and artists and whatever. It was a horrid little in-looking country. So I was waiting for something else to happen. I mean, I was very, very into music from a young age, which was very unusual for a girl. Even young boys weren't into music at that age like they are now. So I was very unusual. I clung to music, and I was looking for something else to happen. And in the end, it didn't. So we made it. And I think that's slightly what's missing now, that thing of, you never miss anything anymore. You know, I would hear the New York Dolls came to London and played, but I heard about it a week later, you know, because we didn't have the internet and you had to get 3 buses across town to see your friends. So if you didn't see them on the right day, you didn't hear about the New York Dolls or whatever. So that constant frustration we felt in the 70s and how long it took to do anything like organise a rehearsal, 3 buses across town to put a note in the door of someone to say, come and play bass on Friday, and you didn't know if they'd come. All those things, all that constant frustration, that feeling you're missing things. You'd read something in Melody Maker or New Musical Express that had happened in America 3 months before. So that made us do things. Whereas now, if I miss a gig, I think, oh, I'll just watch bits of it on YouTube later. And you never feel you've missed anything, you know.
Urgency.
There's no urgency, and there's none of that frustration of feeling you've really missed out, which propels young people to make something instead, because they're angry they missed it, and you know, and also when you try and make something that you've missed, you get it a bit wrong, and then that makes something new. It's a hybrid. You know, you like the painters used to do. They try, Manet or someone would try to do a classical painting. He'd get it a bit wrong, or a bit of influence would come in, and the next thing you know, he started a new movement, a modern art movement. And that's not that we were like Manet, but we were fumbling along, not being able to play properly, not quite getting the references, getting them a bit late, jumbled up with something else. And I think that was what was so great about then, much as it was a frustrating time, but we all know that boredom does help you create, and there's hardly any boredom anymore.
There's no boredom. Stimuli, too much stimuli.
Yeah, even me, when I watch TV now, in the ads, I have to go onto my phone.
Yeah.
It's terrible. I'm as bad.
Well, one thing, because you mentioned art, and you did go to art school, and a lot of people put down art school, but at the time, in the 70s, in the 60s, art school was essentially a training ground for rock and roll groups. And I think it's interesting that now there's these rock schools. So now the people are learning rock. They used to learn rock through making art, and now they learn rock very directly through learning rock. And I think it's really bad for it's bad for the form.
I mean, I agree, because there were no music schools and there were no film schools when I was young. So if you were an alternative sort of person, or you just didn't want to work, you went to art school. I mean, I remember boys saying to me, for me, it's either the army or art school. Can you imagine? That same boy would have those 2 choices if he didn't want a normal life. So anyone who wanted to be a musician, I'd realised, not that I wanted to be a musician, but I was just blindly following musicians. They went to art school first, David Bowie, Roxy Music, the Kinks, whatever. So I just went to the local art school. And that helps you make music that is influenced by Dada or Surrealism or performance art. I think the crossing of any genres is, I think people who go to art school should take a course in music, and people who go to music school should take courses in drawing and life drawing. But now, like you said, they go to art school and music school, and they just learn how to produce and sell their work, and it hasn't got the cross-fertilisation, which I think feeds any art form, really. But, the world's changing, it's getting all a bit wobbly again, and maybe things will come out of that. You're playing, you've been playing music, rock and roll music live, and what's your what's your sense of the way people consume music now, or does it freak you out as opposed to, or is it just, I don't know. Well, since the Slits split up in '81, I can barely listen to music, and I thought I was really weird because it triggers in me so many memories. It was such a hard time. It's not like being in a band was great fun then. It was so hard, and it was so dangerous and scary, and I don't feel we even quite got, at the time, I didn't feel we really got as far as we needed to go, sort of artistically. That for 3 years I couldn't listen to any music, and then now I barely listen to music at all. It's just a trigger for me, sort of. I judge it so harshly because I was brought up on protest music and music that was trying to start revolutions, literally. I was listening to music that was trying to change the way people's brains were configured, or overturn governments or whatever. And even though my daughter, who's 18, says to me, "Oh, Mum, no, music isn't like that anymore," I know it's an old-fashioned thing, but once you've been brought up like that, first I was singing protest songs, and I was listening to anti-Vietnam songs, and then, punk tried to change the way people, were kidding themselves and lying to themselves. So that's how I've been schooled in music. And now, if music doesn't do that, I'm not very interested. I'm not very interested in anything that doesn't do that, in a way, unless it's just a beautifully written pop song. And then, okay, it's not trying to be anything it's not. I can listen to a really beautifully crafted pop song. But it's not enough to me just to hear notes and choruses and rhythm. It's just not enough.
It's interesting that your definition of punk seems to be truth, honesty. Because when you think about the original punk bands, the Ramones and Blondie, they're kind of complete artifice,
Yeah, but I don't consider Blondie punk. I don't know why they call Blondie punk. That she's a good. They're a pop band.
Yeah.
A good pop band. But now the trouble is, with time, everything gets concertinaed together, and people say, "Oh, Blondie's a punk." But no, she was so not punk. She was very intentionally a pop band. Writing pop singles. The Ramones, they did rewrite history in a way. Even though there were things about them that didn't quite ring true. But, the shortness and the sharpness and the minimalism of their work was defining, I think.
And their look, the gang look.
Yeah, but the leather jackets weren't right.
Yeah.
And the jeans weren't right.
Wow.
They were a bit... They weren't right. They weren't biker. They were kind of like girls' jackets.
Yeah, that's true. But that's, they were living in Queens.
But the great thing about the Ramones, which we didn't have amongst the boys here and the musicians here, is that they completely adored girl groups. Now, until the Ramones and Johnny Thunders and the Heartbreakers came over to London, no boys rated the Ronettes or the Shangri-Las or whatever. And those guys, those American guys, made girls cool in the eyes of guys over here. Until then, they didn't get it. And that was massive.
It's the difference between the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. The Beatles are always covering the Shirelles, and the Rolling Stones are only covering, Chuck Berry. Yeah. So one thing about the Slits that's quite, I didn't know that you toured with Don Cherry and all these, that's quite, like you were really trying to create a new, context and a new thing. It's quite eclectic.
Yeah, because, again, through the eyes of history, punk just looks like these cartoony, spiky-haired people who are a bit thick. But nearly all of us were wide readers, were, quite politically aware, were very interested in speaking the truth and artistically trained. And when we did our first tour, the Slits, we thought, well, we don't want to just go out every night playing the same 8-10 songs. There's nothing in it for us. Let's spend all our money, all our advance, our musical advance, on making this tour interesting for us. So we dared to ask Don Cherry, the great jazz trumpeter from America, if he would come and tour with us. It was insane. And he said yes. And the reason he said yes is because he had a little girl called Nana Cherry, and she had dyed red hair. She was 14, and she loved punk. So, we didn't know that. So when Don Cherry said, yeah, he'd come, that was amazing. And then we asked Prince Hammer from Jamaica to bring his band over. So we had these 3 great bands, and we just rotated every night. And we were showing the audience something different, and we were learning ourselves, and it was just amazing, yeah.
And was the audience receptive?
Yeah, punk audiences were totally receptive. So nowadays it's quite normal, isn't it? You go to a festival and you see world music, you might see some African music, you'll see reggae, you'll see electronica, you can hear all different kinds of things. That wasn't happening in the 70s, But we started doing that, mixing, the Slits were the first band ever, white band, to ever play on the same bill as a reggae group. We did a tour with Steel Pulse, yeah. So not only were we white, but we were girls touring with a black reggae band. So, they never crossed genres in those days. Everything was separate,
Yeah.
So there were a lot of barriers we were breaking down, but by the time we split up, all us girls were fucking knackered. We were so tired from the fight. You know, it felt like for 6-7 years, we'd just been in the front line, you know, of everything. Sexism, you know, trying to break that down, trying to break this down, trying to be taken seriously, you know. Everywhere we went, we were stopped and we were attacked, stabbed, you know, spat at,
physically
everything.
Attacked.
Yeah, I mean, it was, honestly, we are still tired to this day. From that time.
Did you attack people? Were you ever attacking people?
Only when first provoked. So, I mean, yeah, you know, often on stage, my friends used to say to me, you never knew what was going to happen at a Slits gig. So it was frightening for the audience. It was frightening for the Slits because we had this attitude of, oh, we're not here to entertain you. We're going to do exactly what we feel like today. We're going to speak to you like your equals. We're hanging out with you, hang out in the audience and everything. Because we had that sort of no barrier type attitude, then the audience went a bit mad, you know. And we'd have skinheads rush the stage and try and attack Harry, especially. She really did irritate people, and pull her off the stage. And as soon as they did that, we'd all unplug our guitars and smack them over the head and make them bleed. But no one went to the police in those days, you know. No one ever complained that we'd split open their head with a guitar, and we never complained that we'd been stabbed or attacked or whatever. So it was like the Wild West, really.
Yeah. It was just this.
There was no law. And, you know, also the police weren't interested in punks, you know. If you walk around the streets looking like that, you deserve everything you get, was the police attitude. Yeah.
At the time in England, there was this culture on King's Road of people parading with their fashion, their style, their little... Oh, yeah. We can move on right now.
Go on then. I just say, because otherwise it's all punk.
Punk.
Yeah, 40 years old, you're bloody dead.
No, yeah. Well, no, it is about the thing you were saying about style. But so one thing about the book that's really touching is your relationship with your mother. Oh. And I thought it was just, it's a constant through the book, and it's just really nice.
Oh, that's interesting, because I sort of quite consciously didn't write very much about her, I thought. But did I write a lot about her? I don't know.
Well, she's always there, you know.
Yeah, because, you know, recently I've been writing a second book, and I was thinking, what made me that girl at 19 who was working class, not very well educated, scared, shy, no books at home or anything? What made me be one of the 5 or 6 girls in the country who picked up an electric guitar? You know, and often when I get interviewed, people say, oh, isn't it great, you know, Mick Jones taught you to play guitar, or Keith Levine. You know, they might have showed me a chord here or a chord there. And I thought, do you know what? It's my mother who made me that person who could pick up a guitar. My mother made me a punk. And then I started to sort of unravel how come my mother had made me a punk when she was a 1940s, 1950s housewife. And as I unravelled that, I got back to my grandmother, who came over from Switzerland at 16 years old with, you know, like 1 franc in her pocket. And it went further and further and back. And I thought, God, yeah, it took me generations to be that girl in 1977 who picked up a guitar. It took generations of women of my family to step just slightly outside the norm. And then, you know, which my grandmother stepped outside the norm. And then my mother, the way she brought me up, which was so free in a way, and not in a hippie way, but so mentally free and so open and trusting of every crazy, mad, stupid idea I had, which is fine if you've got a genius for a kid, but I was no genius. I fucked up everything I did. So, you know, that's quite hard to be a mother who keeps saying, no, you buy a guitar with the only money you'll ever see in your life that your grandmother left you. You know, even though you can't play and no one plays the electric guitar, no, you go to art school if no one has ever been to art school or whatever. You know, she never once put me down. And in those times, the 50s and 60s, when to go to art school was considered your child has failed life if you've gone to art school. It was like you wouldn't say it. People who went to art school were the dregs of society. You know, this was still a country that had just come not long out of the war, and short back and sides were the thing, and knowing how to behave and how to keep your shoes polished. Kids gone to art school, they're a failure. So, but no matter what crazy failure idea I had, my mother encouraged it, and then I'd fuck it up 3 months, 6 months, a year later, and come up with another stupid idea, and she'd be behind that one, on and on and on, until I was 50. It's a fucking long time to keep standing by someone, and each time I fucked up, go back home, sleep in the little bedroom, 30 years old, 40 years old, 50 years old, And it wasn't until I wrote the book and put all those pathetic attempts between 2 bits of cardboard that I realised that there was a shape there, because until I wrote the book, I just felt a complete failure who kept trying things and fucking up. But actually, keep trying things and fucking up eventually creates a story, creates a life, and even a life that actually, well, if nothing else, is entertaining,
Yeah.
But I did feel a failure until I wrote that book.
There's a little bit of a fanatic feel in your book. You focus on something, and then you're completely invested. You become an aerobics instructor, and then you become this filmmaker, and then
And a mother, and everything else went out the window. I don't know why, and I don't know if I've got personality disorder, but I can only do what I'm 100% interested in and absolutely absorbed in, and if I don't feel that about anything, I go to bed. And that's it, you won't see me for 3 months, a year, until something bubbles up again. And I can't almost function unless I'm totally into something. And if I'm not, I'm just bored and depressed.
Yeah.
And I wish I wasn't, but there are hardly any there's no middle ground almost. And I don't know if that's through upbringing or, experimenting with drugs or what, but that's how it is. It's all or nothing. Luckily for my child, it was my child. Or unluckily, actually, probably, she'd say, get off my back, Mum. And, so I was very into bringing my daughter up, and then I was, very into making music, or very into writing my book, and when I wasn't, I was just like, there's that moss that goes to sleep during the winter, or for years sometimes, until the temperature's right. And I must say, when the internet started, when I was about 48, I started to feel like that moss, feeling a bit of sun come through the earth, thinking, do you know what? Something about this reminds me of 1977. And it literally was like I felt sun hitting me deep in the earth, and I was a bit of moss that blossomed again. And that's how I am, and I might be in a bit of a dead bit again, I don't know. But I don't feel excited about music, so I'm not making an album unless I feel excited about music.
That's very responsible of you.
I think so, and I wish every person...
Yeah.
I wouldn't mind a law, actually.
Yeah.
No banging out an album every 18 months because your record company wants you to, and then you tour another 18 months. Oh, the dross. That if we were all only allowed to make something, if we would rather die or, break up our marriage, if we couldn't. That's how art should be made.
Yeah. So do you want to read another chapter of your book?
Yeah, okay.
Or do you want it?
How much longer have we got?
Well, that's what I'm thinking. It's like...
What time is it? How long have we got? 15? Okay, yeah.
Oh.
So this is from the second half of the book, and it's 2008, and I'm living by the sea. I've been ill for 10 years, very ill, cancer, but I'm coming through it, I'm beginning to mend, and I've picked up my guitar again, which has caused tension in the marriage. So I haven't played guitar for 25 years, and I can't play. Anyway, midnight, I get out of the car and carry my guitar up the path to my house. The path is long and winding, sloping steeply upwards with overhanging spiky plants. I can hear the sea crashing on the shingle beach. All the lights in the house are off, because my husband would go to bed early and turn all the lights off, so it was difficult for me. The reason I'm walking up the path at midnight with my guitar is that twice a week I drive 2 hours to a random pub and 2 hours back home again to play 2 of my songs in public at an open mic night, which is where anyone is allowed to stand up in a pub and play 2 songs, no matter how shit you are. Anyway, during the drive, I try and warm up my voice, my terrible nasal North London voice, The voice that I've always been told cannot sing in tune. The voice I have absolutely no confidence in. Driving along the coast road, humming along to the voice exercise tape, I know I sound dreadful. I'm either sharp or flat, God knows which, but this voice is all I've got. No one else is going to sing my songs for me. I pull into the car park of an ugly, pebble-dashed brown building, maneuver into a space, turn off the engine, and sit back in my seat. Do I really want to do this? It's not too late. I can turn on the engine, reverse out of here, and drive home. I don't have to put myself through the humiliation. But for some reason, I do have to. It's like I've been taken over by an alien. I have no say in the matter. I get out, drag my guitar case out of the boot, and walk mechanically up to the bar door. I have a heavy, bruised, dark, sick feeling inside my chest, like I'm going to the gallows. I make numerous trips to the bathroom and wash my hands over and over again. They're sweaty with nerves. I look into the mirror, and a nice, decent, middle-class woman looks back. What the fuck are you doing in this godforsaken place with an electric guitar? Why aren't you at home with your husband and child, watching TV, hoovering, tidying up? I hear my name announced and run back into the pub lounge. My hands are shaking so badly that everyone can see. I start to play. There are no monitors, the speakers are pointing away from me. I can't hear what I'm singing, but I can hear what I'm playing, and it's terrible. I'm shit. I know I'm crap, but I know my songs are good, and I have to get them out there somehow. They're like little creatures clamoring to be heard. I'm compelled to do this beyond logic, beyond failure, beyond self-consciousness. 6 minutes later and it's all over. I unplug the guitar, walk through the tables, back to my seat. Everyone's so embarrassed they don't dare even look me in the eye. They don't know who I am or who I was. And my only ambition is to be able to play and sing 2 songs to an acceptable standard, no matter how bad the equipment is, because some people can do that. Gradually, as I trawl around the pubs, people start to make comments. I like what you play, it's honest, or I know what you mean with those words, I feel the same way. And once, in the middle of nowhere, a boy came up to me and said, "You ever heard of a band called the Slits? You remind me of them."
There's something that's quite impressive to put yourself in that kind of context, because when you're in a scene or something, there's always this, logic. So you can be really terrible in the scene, and it's like there's always, so to put yourself out in space like that is quite crazy.
It was the most humiliating thing I've ever done. And I was a middle-aged woman, and I had an electric guitar, and I'd walk into these pubs full of guys with ponytails and beautiful guitars who could play the blues fantastically, or, play Coldplay songs or whatever. And then I'd get up shaking and go, make these terrible sounds. And it was so humiliating. And I did it for 2 years, every week, twice a week. And by the end of 2 years, I was good.
Yeah.
And by the end of 2 years, I could play anywhere, and I could hold the room, And within 3 years, I was playing big concerts. It was the most humiliating, hellish rite of passage, but nothing I ever did again was as bad as that. And no gig I ever played was frightening after that. When you've sat in a pub and seen an old woman at the bar and 2 fishermen staring at you, and you're making a shit of a sound, it's nothing, they're that far away from you. Nothing is frightening after that, nothing. Yeah. I'm never frightened anymore now.
Should we take questions?
Yeah.
Maybe we should take some questions. Maybe turn up the light so we can see the audience.
Sure.
Come on, girls. You've got to ask a question. Don't care how shit it is. Oh, there's one.
Fear of missing out, FOMO that they call it. And it seems like you had some of that in London, in Britain growing up. Do you see that influencing this next generation to come, like this constant stream of images of people who are better than you, and the need to kind of measure yourself against them?
I do, and I feel a bit sorry for them in a way because, not only we didn't have fear of missing out, we were missing out, we knew we were missing out, and that impelled us to create. But not only are young people now absolutely bombarded with images and sounds and information, there's no room to have those quiet moments where you just stare into space, of which most of my childhood and teenagehood was made up of, thinking. And so it is going to impact on them. And, I'm surprised they haven't gone very quiet, because it's like you've been thrown into the middle of a museum or a library and said, choose any book you like. That's what they've got to deal with, basically. So, I think it will affect them, and I have great faith in young people, and I think they will process, and they will, not necessarily through art, because who gives a fuck about art anyway, but they will process it, and they will somehow make it work for them, and they will try and make the world better in their way. But I think it does affect Western art. And I don't think it's a bad thing if Western art takes a bit of a fucking break, actually, and shuts up for a bit. Because maybe, and I think young people very much, they're so emotionally aware and they're so internationally aware compared to us that they can't help but, in a way, feel more like enabling, I think, than being the ponce on stage. What is the merit of being on stage with a guitar now, really? What the fuck is that going to help a revolution? That's, if I was young now, I certainly, it was radical when I did it. It was barely radical for guys. It was radical for girls to do it when I did it. Now, it isn't really, not in the West, as it's called. So I think it's interesting, very interesting. And maybe they'll enable more or facilitate or whatever, who knows. But I don't think art's precious, I don't think music and rock music or whatever, it should be deified and worshipped, and nor musicians or artists. I just don't. I great respect as much for a scientist or a teacher or a nurse or whatever. I don't like to elevate, skinny boys with long hair, which it still is mostly, into gods. They're not. Who can make things rhyme every 2 minutes, nah. Let's remember what this is and what else is going on. So, I think it will influence for the better eventually. I think young people are humbler than we were. Anyone else? Yeah.
Well, you were saying earlier that you saw yourself as a failure because you fucked up everything you did. When I was reading the book, what I actually thought at the time was, wow, she reinvented herself every time she fell and she got back up. And everything she did, actually, she was successful at. So that was very inspiring. Not at all a failure, but somebody who can regenerate every time. And I was wondering if you ever, when you finished the book, that ever occurred to you that it might be different, like that your self-perception might have been skewed by different factors, including the fact that the earlier generations, your generation, and partly my generation, thought that you had to do one thing in your life and do it absolutely well and identify totally with the thing you did.
Yeah, I had no thought of myself being a success until I finished the book, and it was between the two covers. But even then, not really. But then the first few people who read the book started to say exactly that. My God, Viv, every time you get knocked down, you get back up again. And I honestly couldn't see it myself from inside my life. And as I got feedback from the book, it validated my life, which is probably a rather sad thing to say. You should feel validated without other people's reflections, but it did, I suddenly realised, my God, yeah, and I'm such a scared person, how come? And again, I traced it back to my mother, who, when I fell down, instead of laughing at me and saying, go and get a proper job or whatever, back to her room, her spare room, build me up again, out the door I go, and have another idea. So I can trace it back to my mother, that probably. But I wasn't aware as I was living it, I did just feel a failure, especially in the times when it wasn't interesting or cool to be in a band or, or be at art school or whatever. You were just on the edges of society and keep changing. And then I started noticing that in America, They didn't have this thing where you had to stick to one job all your life and be good at it. And if you changed from being a soap actor to a film actor, you weren't serious. Or if you changed from a writer to a musician, you weren't serious. Or a model could act or whatever. You know, America didn't have those limitations. And as I suppose my reading and the internet and whatever, as things grew and I have got a wider perspective on life, I was very influenced by the way the Americans allowed their artists to change genres, and you know that is a thing over there, which has been a long time. You know, you're allowed to reinvent yourself over there. It was a very British thing. You're not serious unless you're that all your life, and thank God that has gone actually from Britain now. Yeah. But yeah, so I did feel a failure, and it wasn't until I really got response to the book that I started to realise that I did have a strength, you know, and that there was nothing wrong with trying all those different things. That's okay, that's who you are, Viv. That's who lots of people are. Yeah. Sagittarius, is it?
Traveling, yeah. Traveling,
aiming at the stars, yeah.
Anybody else?
Would anybody else? Unas preguntas.
Yay.
Okay.
Hey, what advice do you have? I work with teenagers and mostly...
You work with mostly teenage girls.
What advice do you have to young female musicians, artists,
Yeah, so yeah, what advice to young teenage girls who are scared and probably don't feel they have the right to be that, which I didn't. I think a lot of working class children don't feel they've got the right to be creative. You think you're going to be laughed at, frankly. What would I say? I mean, I really would love, and I cooked up this idea, to teach failure in schools, a lesson that you have at least twice a week, where to get the school prize, you have to really fuck up badly. So, you know, you'll have, and it's not in a stupid way, not how you're going to fail, okay, you've got to write this, and someone just writes fuck, 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 fuck. That wouldn't do it. But, you know, to try really hard at something and fail. Running race or whatever. Running race and then writing and then music and then trying to sing, and you were just tested and made a fool of week after week after week, especially in girls' schools. And so by the time you come out of it, you're so used to trying and failing, because I think especially girls are not used to that. I think boys learn it a lot through sport. You know, you go to kick a ball and you miss and you fall over, and you see it on TV all the time. Boys playing sport, men playing sport, falling over, missing, crying, you know, and they learn to fail young, and they have no fear of failure. Not like us girls do, to the point where we daren't even try. I mean, I know grown women, really intelligent women, who have tried to be screenwriters, but it was so hard, and I kept failing, so I went to teach. And yeah, it's fucking hard, but you know, because you went to teach, not that there's anything wrong with that, but you've made it even harder, because it was hard for the men to do it as well. Maybe not quite as hard as it is for a woman. But so I would just love girls to try and fail more. Try and fail, try and fail, try and fail. That's my whole life has been made of, and now I've made a good book out of it. So yeah, I'd like to be the patron saint of trying and failing somehow. So, you know, but, you know, I've got an 18-year-old daughter, and I try over and over to tell her to try and fail, and still I'm battling society, which is also telling her, don't look stupid, you know, don't dress stupid, don't draw attention to yourself. So it's hard. It's hard even now. And, you know, even now the girls stand on the edges and watch the boys play sport or watch the boys skateboard, even now, all these years later. So,
I love it that you went to the open mic nights, because I feel like some people, once they get a situation that they don't feel comfortable in, move on to the next thing that they want to do. So, yeah, I'm just wondering how you make people just realise that they want to do what they want to do and just keep trying and failing, but just push on.
yeah, I have become slightly addicted to that feeling of being uncomfortable, actually. So I almost can't let my life just settle now, which isn't great because I'm always trying to upturn it in some way. But, you know, in a way, unless you can take away the internet and drugs and alcohol, and people are so bored that they're entertaining themselves, I don't know how you do it. I was brought up in a time we had no TV, no phone, no books on the shelves, you know. I was a girl, there were no opportunities for girls. I mean, my boredom level was huge. And in that time I was formed, I would constantly try and find ways to entertain myself, which were things like, you know, go to art school, make art that would shock people, you know, do erotic pieces of work. You know, I tried to make work that would get a reaction. And I became addicted to it. So I don't know how, again, in this time, you get people to do that because there isn't that level of boredom. You know, it's like the blessing is close to the wound, that old African saying, that, you know, the terrible thing in your life, the boredom, is what created all the albums and the books and, you know, the challenges. So I would say it's quite hard, but look to the worst thing in your life, because lying right next to that is the best thing you can do in your life. You know, that thing, that terrible thing, that, you know, crippling illness or the death of someone close or whatever, right next to that is the thing that you've got to unlock your life, if you can find it. And perseverance, yeah. So it's failure, perseverance, and looking very close to the terrible things in your life, because right near them are the good things.
Anyone else would have
a good place to end, isn't it?
So I think that Viv is going to do a book signing tonight at the most beautiful bookstore in Barcelona. It's more beautiful than Barnes & Noble. What's it called? You heard it. So everybody should go there. What time is that going to happen? 7:30. Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Viv. That was genuinely inspirational.